I don't know what day revision stream this is. Probably like day 20 something. We are back, so we're following up yesterday's stream. Yesterday we went over the action potential, which, again, we'll go over it again. The Pacinian corpuscle, and we looked at photoreceptors. We did not look at myogenic tissue, and that was mainly because we had just done it in class, so I thought there's probably no point in putting a priority on it, but we should still do it today. I have maybe an hour. I want to get some exam questions done. I'm just trying to recall what do we need to work on today. Let's go over the action potential first, because that feeds in very nicely to the Pacinian corpuscle, and then from there we can kind of just see where it goes. We have plenty of time. So. Action potential. Let's start off with, this is going to be a very crude diagram, so I'm not even going to erase any mistakes. We just need to demonstrate roughly how this works. So, firstly, these are going to be our sodium ion channels. These are going to be our leaky potassiums. There are obviously regular potassium channels too that remain closed, so we don't need to... I think there are anyways, unless the leaky ones just become, And then obviously there is the NA pump. So, to begin with, in the action potential, the resting potential is 65 millivolts. Okay, 65 millivolts, because this is maintained via three things. Firstly, the NA pump pumps out free Na, and it lets in 2K. So obviously, this is going to be polarized. It's going to have a negative charge because you're losing 3 ions, gaining 1. It's a net loss of 1. So this is a negative charge. Inside this, you have to remember, this is like the cell membrane in the axon of so it would be like here. That's where we are right now. So, negative charge. Sodium-potassium pump maintains this negative charge. Potassium is going to leak, I think, in... I don't specifically recall, but the leaky potassium... The potassium ion channels are going to be leaking potassium. That's all you need to write, basically. And then sodium, the Na channels, are going to be closed. So again, this maintains a negative millivoltage. Okay, so when a stimuli occurs, and we can draw a little graph here to demonstrate this. That is the action potential. So when a stimuli occurs, some of the sodium ion channels are going to open, okay? Some of them are going to open. Some sodium ion channels are going to open, which will obviously increase the charge here. If the stimuli is significant enough, great enough, it is going to go above the threshold necessary to trigger the full action potential. I think it's the all or nothing principle. So it's this idea that if a stimuli is insignificant, then it's just going to return to normal, to the resting potential. And if it is a significant stimuli, the all or nothing principle will enable this to happen. And the way that works is some sodium ion channels will open, But then, if the stimuli is significant enough, reaches the threshold, then all of the sodium ion channels are going to open. Sodium is going to diffuse in. That is something you need to mention: diffusion and active transport. Obviously, this is active transport, this is diffusion. That's obviously diffusion, just facilitated. So yeah, you need to mention about that, and you need to mention the concentration gradients. So, from there, it will reach, I believe it is 40 plus 40 millivolts. Then from there, our potassium ion channels are going to open, and this will cause potassium ions to diffuse out of the cell. This will rapidly lower the charge all the way back to minus 65 millivolts, but it will actually lower the charge even more, and that is due to the fact that these potassium channels are going to stay open longer than necessary. So it is literally lowering the charge below, as you can see here. But that's all you really need to know for the action potential. That is all you really need to know. So to begin with, we have a low resting potential of minus 65 millivolts. You have the NAK pump, which maintains this negative, gradient. It maintains this negative voltage, negative charge, I guess you could say. And then obviously when a stimuli occurs. Now, I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. So let's check the revision document. So yeah, resting potential of minus 65 is established. Leaky potassium channels and closed sodium channels ensure a maintained negative charge inside the cell. So yeah, when a stimuli is detected, some sodium channels will open, causing sodium to diffuse down the concentration gradient and into the cell, which will raise the charge, obviously. That's simple to say. If a stimuli is large enough, the charge will exceed the threshold potential, and the all-or-nothing principle is triggered. All the sodium channels will open, rising the charge. So it is literally a game of just charges, okay? So to begin with, there is this minus 65 millivolts, and imagine this is the outside of a cell, this is the inside. The inside is going to be negative, this is going to be positive. Then here, it's going to be changing, it's going to be going up. So obviously then, there's going to be a couple, like that. If it's the all or nothing principle, then obviously that's going to be 40 millivolts, and it's going to be like this, and then etc. So I think it's really simple. I think it's really simple to understand. It is basically just charges. So in an exam, if we get asked tomorrow about this, specifically, there are a couple keywords we can write down, and I'll keep these on the board for the whole stream to kind of keep them in mind. Obviously, the first one is going to be diffusion / active transport. Obviously, it sounds basic, but you could drop a mark just for not specifying how it travels. So make sure to always specify. I'm going to move this slightly. So yeah, make sure to always specify. That's important. Obviously, literally just mentioning like charges. Is this area charged positively, negatively? Obviously, the threshold potential. And I guess just resting potential. Okay, so those are like the key words you need to be able to explain action potential. So let's very quickly go through that just one last time in very simple terms. So to begin with, we have a negative charge of minus 65 millivolts. This is maintained via the sodium-potassium pump, which will pump into the cell 2 potassium ions for every 3 sodium ions pumped out, via active transport against the concentration gradient. From there, the sodium ion channels are going to be closed, and the potassium ion channels are going to be leaking. Okay, from there, when a stimuli occurs, some sodium channels are going to open. This will obviously raise the charge. From there, depolarization. Because if the charge is significant enough, and it surpasses the threshold potential, depolarization will occur, which will increase the charge to 40 millivolts, because all the sodium channels are going to be open. And finally, repolarization, because the sodium channels are going to open, which is going to rapidly lower the charge. So I think, honestly, me explaining that is very simple. Hopefully we get like a 6 marker, just having to explain action potential. I think that would be really good. Next is the Pacinian corpuscle. So the way you would draw this is it would be like a sensory neuron, but then it would be surrounded by these extra layers of membrane. Like so. So you have to remember they are pressure receptors, aka mechanoreceptors. Okay? Mechanoreceptors. So they respond to pressure, which is why they are embedded deep in your dermis. Epidermis obviously is like the skin. Dermis is like the deep skin. Okay? The upper skin, the deep skin. They're located in your dermis. So this is the Pacinian corpuscle. They are basically sensory neurons with just a big grey membrane surrounding them. Many layers of membranes, you could say. Now, the way these work is, I'm going to have to erase everything on this board now. So there you go, simple definition. It is basically, let's just imagine this is a layer of the membrane. Here we have stretch-mediated Na plus channels. Stretch-mediated means that they are able to stretch. So initially, they are going to be closed, which means the charge inside the cell is going to be very low. The charge outside is going to be positive, because we can link this right back to the action potential. There are going to be the sodium-potassium pumps, which are pumping out the sodium, maintaining that negative charge, negative resting potential. So, when pressure is applied, the stretch-mediated channels are going to open up, allowing sodium ions to enter the cell and increasing the charge. Now from there are some specific words which I don't recall. So yeah, when pressure is applied, the stretch-mediated, remember to call them that, are opened, causing sodium to diffuse in. Obviously should have said diffuse in, I just said raising the charge, but you get what I mean. What we need to know is this increase in charge creates a generator potential, which, if large enough, will trigger an action potential that causes an electrical impulse to travel down the axon. So, this creates a generator potential, which, if it's large enough, will create an action potential, which will obviously travel down the axon as an electrical impulse. So, now we can add some more words to our little bank that we've been, working on. First word to the bank is going to be generator potential. Next one is going to be the stretch mediated Na plus channels. And that's basically it, I think. We should highlight diffusion because clearly we'll need to refer to that later. So that right there is one of the hardest topics, I would say, in terms of getting your head around. This idea that they are transducers. So they convert one type of energy to another. They convert, I guess it would be kinetic energy, right? Yeah, they convert kinetic energy into an electrical impulse, which is just remarkable. But anyways, so yeah, occurs in the membrane surrounding the sensory neuron in the Pastinian corpuscle. Cool. Let's do receptors, photoreceptors. Okay, rods and cones. I draw them like this, just so it's easy to remember, but I don't think they look like this. Oh, they probably look like this very crudely. So, thing you need to know, the easiest way I remember it is cones, literally, this is so easy. Cones starts with a C, it allows you to see in colour. And from there, you can just expand on the rest, okay? So, rods. So remember, the retina is where we're looking right now. Cones, rods respond to a low light intensity. Cones respond to obviously a higher light intensity. These have a very narrow colour spectrum. These obviously have a high colour spectrum. I don't know which ones are abundant in the fovea or not. Obviously the pigment is rhodopsin and idopsin. Visual acuity. This is what I was on about yesterday. This seemingly complicated idea, which actually makes a lot of sense. It's this idea that there are multiple bipolar cells, which remember, I think bipolar cells, the only thing you need to know about them is that the bipolar cells carry this electrical impulse from, the receptor to the sensory neuron. That's all that they do. They're just like the middleman. So the idea you need to understand is that in rods, they have a low visual acuity, and these have a high visual acuity. And that's because you have, let's just say, bipolar cells here. Each one is going to be connected to multiple rods. And that means that it increases the chance of an action potential being triggered just by, it's kind of, okay, it is a bit annoying to explain. I'll give the spec that. But basically, because rods can only respond to low light intensities, it means that they become stimulated more easily because they're connected to more bipolar cells. I think this is called like accumulation or something. Basically, this idea that in the dark, like your vision is going to be slightly blurred because it's combining multiple rod cells into just one impulse. That's what it is. Okay, so instead of with cones, where if one cone is stimulated by light, it's sending one signal. If one cone is stimulated by light, it's going to connect to multiple bipolar cells. So let me go on the PowerPoint and actually remember this specifically. Oh, we should talk about what it does. It's very simple. The pigment inside these is bleached. And that's basically all you need to know. So when light hits a photoreceptor, it bleaches the pigment. The breakdown of a pigment will, as we know, lead to an increase in charge, creating a generator potential, which, if large enough, will trigger an action potential, which is then passed on to the bipolar cells, and the pigments regenerate. They will either regenerate quickly in cones or slowly in rods, which I think is easy to remember. But let me have a look, before we move on to the myogenics. If it'll load. Yeah, so many rod cells connect to a single bipolar cell. Okay, so I was wrong. I said many bipolar cells connect to a single rod. It's actually many rods connect to a single bipolar. So it would be more like that. Okay, cool. So many rod cells connect to a single bipolar. This will lead to the production of one action potential. So a single impulse towards the brain will be generated, no matter how many rods were stimulated. So it's, yeah, low visual. It's retinal convergence. The threshold value has to be exceeded. So rod cells respond to low light. So a number of rod cells are connected to a single bipolar neuron. That ensures that no matter what the stimuli of the light is, light will always trigger an action potential when hitting rod cells because they are connected to multiple, because multiple rods are connected to a single bipolar cell, aka retinal convergence. So we should write that down. So the words here we need to know is retinal convergence, bipolar cell. I guess we could mention obviously the bleaching. Because yeah, bleaching the pigments will lead to an increase in charge, which will thus lead to everything else happening. So, finally, myogenic control. This shouldn't take long because I have just done it, so I feel like if I get this wrong, it's probably a bad thing. Right, imagine that this is the heart. This is how I always draw the heart, even in exams. Because why would you draw an accurate one, you know? Right, let's quickly label it. Obviously, this is going to be, I don't know, I'm just going to draw it like this because I don't actually know how they sit out in the books. So, this is going to be the right atrium. That's going to be the right ventricle. This is going to be the left atrium. The left ventricle. Okay, that's all you really need to be able to do. So, the idea is, this right here is the SAN, aka the sinoatrial node. And what will happen is the sinoatrial node will send out a wave of excitation. A wave of excitation. And this wave will travel to the right atria and the left atria, respectively. And what will happen is because this is excitation, you know, like charge, it's a wave of charge. Because this is a wave of charge, what it is going to do is it is going to depolarize the muscle cells, the myogenic the myocyte tissue, I think is a better way of saying it. It's going to depolarize the muscle tissue, causing it to contract, which will obviously lead to atrial systole. So let me just make sure I've got that right. Yeah, the sinoatrial node sends a wave of excitation which travels across both atria and then it arrives at the AVN, which I'm just going to draw. I don't know where it is. I'm going to guess it's there because it's called the atrioventricular node. So, this wave of excitation is going to travel, let's just draw it fully, to both. It's going to travel to both atria, but also the AVN. This wave of excitation, again, causes a depolarization in the muscle cells, as I say, which will cause them to contract. Thus, the atria will contract, aka atrial systole. After a short delay, so we need to continue here. After a short delay, and you might get asked in an exam, why would there be a short delay here? It's to give the atria time to contract and then relax. After a short delay, the AVN will send a wave of excitation through the bundle of His. So it's kind of like, it's hard to show on a diagram like that. It's called a bundle of His. I'm guessing it's like conductive or something. The wave of excitation is passed through the bundle of His, which will depolarize. It will reach the ventricles, depolarizing the muscle cells in the ventricles, causing them to contract from the apex. So, we have now finished everything. So those are our keywords for each thing. That's for myogenic control. Oh wait, there is one tiny little topic left. This one is very simple. It's about the carotid arteries and the medulla. Basically, if you need to increase your heart rate, let's say if you're undergoing intense exercise, what happens? You are going to be respiring more. Because you're respiring more, that is going to increase the amount of CO2 in your bloodstream, because CO2 is produced when you respire. CO2 will obviously lead to an increase in pH via carbonic acid. Okay, we're on the page. So, context aside, this increase in pH is detected by chemoreceptors in the carotid arteries, which I'm pretty sure is what connects the heart to the brain. I could be wrong. I think it's what connects it. So chemoreceptors detect this change in the carotid artery. Okay. From there, what is going to happen is if there is a high pH, so pH should decrease. If pH decreases versus increases, so if there is less respiration going on, your heart rate is going to need to increase versus decrease. So this would be parasympathetic, this would be sympathetic. What would happen is it's detected by the carotid arteries, it would travel, the chemoreceptors would send an impulse via the parasympathetic if it's trying to raise. I don't understand. No, hold on. I must have done this wrong in my book. Either that or I'm misreading what I wrote. If a pH decreases, so it's more acidic, it's going to decrease the heart rate. Okay, so if it's more... yeah. So parasympathetic is going to decrease versus increase. So it's going to travel this signal that has been detected by the receptors, this impulse. Hold on, I need to get the phrasing right. So yeah, the blood pH, well, if a blood pH is, for example, decreased, it's going to be detected by a chemoreceptor. That signal will then be obviously brought to the brain. From there, it's going to travel via the parasympathetic pathway, which will increase the frequency of nerve impulses to the sinoatrial node. So, yeah, the signal is transmitted via the medulla, via the sympathetic pathway, or parasympathetic. This will increase the frequency of nerve impulses transmitted to the sinoatrial node, increasing the heart rate by increasing the rate of atrial systole. And it's the same for blood pressure. Barometer receptors. Baroreceptors in the carotid arteries would detect a pressure change. If your blood pressure is lower, then obviously your heart rate needs to rise to, continue allowing blood pressure to rise to normal. So yeah. I think that's it. So literally all we need to say there is this change is detected via the receptor in the carotid arteries. The signal is transmitted to the medulla via sympathetic if it's trying to increase, parasympathetic if it's trying to decrease. I like to imagine it like like parasite, and it's like slugging you down. It's trying to decrease the rate of heart rate. Both of them will increase the frequency of nerve impulses to the sinoatrial node, which will obviously increase or decrease the heart rate by increasing or decreasing the rate at which the atria contracts. So, that is the revision done. That has taken us about 35 minutes, just under. So now it is time to actually check if there's any exam questions, which I can't lie, I don't think there were many. I feel like there'll be a lot on the heart. So God knows where the teacher's going to get some from. Okay. Oh, I forget that, some of these questions we can't do yet. Oh, cones are abundant in the fovea. It's rods that aren't abundant. So cones are abundant, rods are not abundant. Cones are abundant. Suggest and explain how the interaction between the muscles could cause the pupil to constrict. I don't know. We have not done that. Yeah. The fovea of the eye of an eagle has a high density of cones. An eagle focuses the image of its prey onto its fovea. Explain how the fovea enables an eagle to see its prey in detail. What the living fuck is this question? What? Do not refer to colour vision. How many marks? 3? What the living fuck? There are no clues in that question for what I talk about. What? The fovea of an eye has a high density of cones. So are we talking about cones specifically? Saying that light bleaches, they're only connected to... Each cone is connected to one bipolar, so it's a high visual acuity. Is that what it's wanting us to say? Yeah, high visual acuity Each cone is connected to a single bipolar neuron. And then, so 2 marks. I would have got 2 marks for that. Fuck yeah. And that's just because cones will send separate sets of impulses to the brain, unlike rods, where it will send a single impulse to the brain. That's fairly good. So a high visual acuity would have gotten a mark. Each cone is connected to a single neuron, a single bipolar. Yeah, would have got that. And all I would have needed to specify there is cones will send separate sets of impulses to the brain instead of all clumped together. I'm happy there. 2 marks for a question that I had no fucking idea how to answer. Cool. The retina of an owl has a high density of rod cells. Explain how this enables an owl to hunt its prey at night. Okay, rods. You would specify that they... Would you say retinal convergence? Maybe... Okay, here's what I think. Maybe you would refer to retinal convergence. You would say that rods respond to a lower light intensity. So, yeah, having a high density of rod cells, rods respond to a lower light intensity. Retinal convergence means that an action potential is always sent despite the low light intensities. Maybe something like that. Yeah, high visual sensitivity or retinal convergence will mark several rods connected to a single neuron. Enough neurotransmitters are then triggered to overcome a threshold. Okay, so I would have gotten a mark. Cool. The retina of an owl has a high density. So, the point we need to get there is with rods and cones, the idea is rather simple. With cones, they have a high visual acuity because, well, we already know each cone is connected to a single bipolar. These have retinal convergence, which means that multiple rod cells are connected to the same bipolar. And obviously that means that it can overcome the threshold easier because of this. What does a mark scheme say? Enough neurotransmitters to overcome the threshold, or summation to overcome the threshold. So enough neurotransmitters to overcome the threshold. So yeah, spatial summation allows you to overcome the threshold. Meanwhile, here with a high visual acuity, it means that separate electrical impulses sent to brain. Yeah, the cone sends separate sets of impulses to the brain. So separate impulses sent to the brain. So, I think that has cleared a lot of things up. There we go. Retinal convergence is where multiple rods are connected to the same bipolar cell. This allows you to overcome the threshold via spatial summation. Meanwhile, with cones, they have a high visual acuity because it sends separate impulses to the brain because each cone is connected to only one bipolar. Cool. Let's continue. This is the Pacinian corpus go. Explain how a resting potential of minus 70 millivolts is maintained in the sensory neuron when no pressure is applied. So no pressure means that the stretch-mediated sodium ion channels are going to be closed. The NAK pump is going to be pumping out 3 sodium for every 2 potassium, maintaining a negative charge inside the neuron. Membrane more permeable to potassium ions. I wouldn't have got that. Sodium ions actively transported / pumped out, and potassium ions in. Right, well, I would never have figured that out, that the membrane is more permeable. So, 1 mark. Explain how applying pressure to the Pacinian corpuscle produces changes in the membrane. So this would be that pressure is detected. The pressure would cause the stretch-mediated sodium ion channels to open. This would cause sodium ions to diffuse in, increasing the charge, which will create a generator potential, which, if significant enough, would obviously go above the threshold, triggering an action potential. Let's have a look. So pressure causes the membrane to be stretched, sodium ion channels open. Okay, we should specify that. So, the membrane itself stretches, which would cause the sodium channels to open. And obviously, the greater the pressure, the more channels are going to open. I think that's self-explanatory, but I wouldn't have wrote that, so I wouldn't have gotten 2 marks. Fuck off. The membrane potential at Q is the same whether medium or heavy pressure was applied. Why would this be? Because every sodium ion channel is open? The threshold is being reached, causes a max response. Okay. Would not have got that. And that is every single exam question on the eyes. Well, sorry, on receptors. Right, well. It's 8:20 now. So to be honest with you, I might head off. Obviously I'm gonna play for like an hour and then I'm gonna head off. So, if there's anything we've learned from today's stream, number 1, this idea of retinal convergence versus a high visual acuity, because obviously multiple rod cells are going to be connected to the same bipolar cells, well, to a single bipolar cell. Spatial summation allows you to overcome the threshold. We can talk about the membrane stretching. So I think for this exam, the questions, I'm getting the vibe that these questions are annoying. And what I mean by annoying is, you know, they're annoying questions. These are going to be questions where you'll write something that you think is obvious that they won't get you a mark for. You'll write something that isn't obvious and you won't get, like, it's going to be one of those question papers where you'll write some correct things and not get marks. You'll write some correct things and get marks, which is annoying. I hate the mark schemes because they are not fair and they punish you for knowing information but not phrasing it the way that they want. So that is unfortunate, but hopefully we'll do okay. Hopefully. So by tomorrow evening, hopefully I'll have done okay. Because again, it's only, at the end of the day, this isn't like an assessment, this isn't an exam. This is just like a mid-topic test, so she knows how well we're doing. Hopefully this revision stream has been helpful, I hope. I personally think I'll do, I just so long as I get above 50%, I'll be happy. Because, like, clearly, there's some things that I understand easily, like the action potential, like the Pacinian corpuscle, I think things like the myogenic tissue is gonna be easy enough. So let's hope that, tomorrow we'll do okay. Try our best. Hopefully do decent enough. And yeah. Thank you guys for watching, obviously. But yeah, this is solid stream. I'm happy with this. So yeah, just making sure I'm looking at this. I think we're good for the myogenic tissue. I think that's really easy. Unless we get a question on the feedback loop, which would be a bit more difficult. But just remember, parasympathetic will reduce, sympathetic will increase. Okay. We know about that, the resting action potential. Generator potential, if it reaches a threshold, which will become an action potential. So the big buzzwords is potential, threshold. The membrane stretches, which causes the channels to open. If the voltage is 40 for multiple, that means that obviously the threshold has been reached. Retinal convergence, and this idea of visual acuity. Visual acuity. Okay.